Hey everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar today. You could be spending your time doing a lot of different things right now, but you chose to spend this time with us, and we really appreciate that. If you're not familiar with us, we are Digital Glue. We are a glass-to-glass systems integrator. That's the glass of the camera lens to the glass of the screen. We are one technology partner for content creation, post-production, contribution, and distribution. From studio build-outs to broadcast equipment, we've got you covered. My name is Nick Anderson, and I'm a futurist, a colorist, and product manager for creative.space here at Digital Glue. Our mission with creative.space is to minimize the time it takes to turn vision into reality. creative.space gives you blazing fast collaborative media storage at your facility with a managed service model that aligns our incentives with yours as a customer. By making storage an operational expense, you can get started with the storage you need today and grow only when you need to, avoiding the capital budgeting process entirely. Our software-defined storage architecture affordably scales from supporting smaller teams working with today's 4K formats to high availability systems supporting hundreds of artists. Our proactive support allows you to stay ahead of potential bottlenecks as well as a continued dialogue to help you get the most out of your system. Finally, our in-house software development team is building some really exciting solutions that we're going to be releasing soon. By joining our early adopter program, you can have a voice as we design tools to enrich the day-to-day lives of artists, engineers, and managers. Now let's get into the topic for this webinar: a blueprint for the future of creative collaboration. When Tim, our CEO, came up with the idea for this webinar, my thought was to focus on all the technology that's poised to change the way we work. But it's also important to focus on what's not going to change, to build a foundation for creative collaboration that goes beyond the tech. The real question is, how do you build a sustainable creative culture? My experience has shown that creativity and collaboration don't naturally blend together very well. Often it's more of an either-or situation. Pure collaboration can get mired in chaos, while unfettered creativity can lead you down unproductive rabbit holes. How do we reconcile the two to find a starting point rather than a destination for the coming change? The answer lies in Creativity, Inc., the autobiography of Ed Catmull, co-founder of Pixar. If you haven't read it, it's perhaps the best and most accessible single work on how to build and sustain a healthy creative culture. There's one quote that helped me form the thesis of this presentation: focus on getting it right, not getting it right the first time. What I seem to keep hearing reiterated in different ways in documentaries chronicling the work and processes of not only Pixar, but also Studio Ghibli, Stanley Kubrick, and even Steve Jobs, was that embracing mistakes and speaking with candor, open and honestly, were really what it took to make quality content. The difference between those who fail and those who succeed is that those who failed simply stopped too early. In other words, they didn't iterate enough. You can't predict where your creative journey will take you. You can only set your intentions, take action, learn from the consequences of those actions, and then decide to continue or stop. This presentation will be split into two parts. The first providing the blueprint, and the second reviewing the various technologies that are poised to change the world in the coming years. First, I'll summarize the 7 keys to a creative mindset. Then, I'll break down the different types of action involved in turning vision into reality. Following that, I'll break down the 4 elements of any creative endeavor, defining the characteristics of both unhealthy and healthy cultures. This will all come together in a breakdown of the creative journey. Finally, I'll provide a context for understanding 5G, virtual, augmented, and mixed reality, AI and machine learning, cognitive interfaces, and decentralized networks. After all that, we'll have a Q&A where you can ask any questions you might have. The 7 keys to a creative mindset provide a blueprint that you can trust and have faith in to overcome the fear that leads too many creatives to imposter syndrome. The first one is, inspiration is not a talent. It's a state of mind that can be strengthened through practice. Second, initial bias incites premature judgment and keeps you from focusing on the communication of intent. Third, style is your inevitable print onto your creation. You can't escape it. Fourth, seek out experiences that challenge you to think in new ways. Give yourself permission to grow. Fifth, always consider what the opposite of your idea or perspective would look like. The right answer is often somewhere in between. Sixth, let your mind go wherever it wants to, without judgment. Ideas can be bigger than we can see in the moment. It might be easier to understand once you reach the end. And seventh and finally, intentionally focus on specific visions you want to bring into reality, but recognize how those ideas react to external pressure. Collectively, there's one core message. which is to respect your ideas as forming over time and focus on communicating your intentions instead of prematurely judging yourself or the potential of your idea. As you bring an idea into reality, you get to see all the kinks, and only then will you begin to address them. As Brad Bird, director of The Incredibles and Ratatouille, would say, the key is to fail fast and fail often. Implementing each of these keys doesn't guarantee that you'll be successful in turning your vision into a reality. This is a process that can be broken down into practical steps that aren't necessarily always sequential. You have experiences which inspire you with new ideas. You capture those ideas in some form in order to work with them. You develop those ideas, building connections and forming them into coherent visions, and then you plan actions to bring those ideas into reality. You perform those actions, and then you share work with others to experience. The PDF you should have received prior to this presentation delves deeper into our vision for how technology will assist in each of these steps, so I hope you had a chance to take a look at that. There are 4 elements that inevitably interact to help or hinder any creative endeavor: the creative or artist, their idea, their environment, and their community. The keys to a creative mindset cover only the creative or artist's relationship to their idea. The artist's environment dictates literally what they are able to accomplish through the mediums available to communicate those ideas. The artist's community builds their experiences and may determine whether they will have an audience for their idea once it comes to fruition. So, what does a sustainable creative culture look like? Well, it's a community of artists that work together effectively. Each artist is a unique individual in a culture made up of other artists. The key to a healthy creative culture is communication. When artists communicate with candor and respect, they're able to avoid creative stagnation. So, what causes creative stagnation? Well, creativity is stagnated when fear, shame, and guilt stop healthy communication. Why has this become such an epidemic in our industry? Walter Benjamin eloquently identifies the issue in his famous essay, The Storyteller. Experience has fallen in value. The democratization of filmmaking tools made it easy for people to get access to the right tools, but failed to provide avenues to learn how to use those tools effectively. Without practical experience in established institutions, newcomers are forced to learn everything in the wild. Everyone is left to figure it out on their own, which is exhausting, not to mention impossible. Nobody knows what anybody else knows, and this is really an easy environment for fear, shame, and guilt to creep in and distract people from focusing on what is important to them. So what does imposter syndrome look like? It comes in the form of that judgmental voice in your head that keeps you from learning, from growing, from doing. Creatives need to focus on both their intentions and the goals they share with their teams. Honesty, excellence, communication, originality, and self-assessment are all things that we have to enforce on ourselves. A culture is healthiest when its members enforce themselves. From executive producers down to the production assistants, a team's leadership structure should not be its communication structure. All right, so we've covered a lot of information, and you may be wondering, how does this all fit together? Well, once again, Walter Benjamin provides the answer. The key to fitting this all together is story. Alongside doing the research for this presentation, on my own time, I was working on dissecting story structure for my own creative projects. What I realized was that story structure, or the hero's journey, could practically be applied to any creative endeavor, not just narratives. This would become the foundation for a concept I call the IARC: intention, action, reaction, and change. I use a little I for intention because it only happens once at the beginning of a chain of IARCs, and changes continuously through the process as you learn. In a moment, I'm going to map both the IARC and the 7 keys to creativity onto a timeline as a single creative journey. But before I do that, it's important to understand what makes the IARC such an important concept for collaboration. The IARC works on both macro and micro scales. Your entire project is one big IARC that's made up of a bunch of smaller ones, like how a movie contains 3 acts, each made up of scenes, which themselves are made up of beats. Unlike a movie, in the real world, there isn't just one protagonist. We are all the heroes of our own stories, and yet somehow we have to work together to collectively reach our goals. The key to creative collaboration is to break down the work into actions that can be done by a single artist. Instead of focusing on predicting how long the project will take, you focus on iteration and keeping IARC cycles as short as possible. Each IARC is an experiment that may be helpful and may not be. When it doesn't go as planned, you simply decide if it's worth continuing or not. Making these IARCs as simple as possible gives the artist freedom to experiment, while a faster feedback loop allows vision leaders to provide more nuanced input. Budget is controlled and consumed as an ongoing process rather than a fixed cost. By breaking down creativity and collaboration into the structure, action and feedback become a linear process with the proper checks and balances needed to create quality work. Personally, I implement this workflow in my color work. I negotiate a flat rate off of expected hours and then tie those hours to a specific number of iterations with deliverables, with specific times for client feedback. They typically start off with 3 iterations and pay per iteration after that. I add free iterations on my own at no additional charge if I exceed my hours exploring my own creative directions. I get to both enjoy the process and make the client happy. This allows me to go on a creative journey with as much freedom as possible. So what is that creative journey? Well, first, you have to find your inspiration. Then you need to acknowledge your own biases and how they inform your intentions. Then capture those intentions to form your vision. Then you take action to turn those ideas into reality. Focus on doing what's right, not on getting it right. And as you experiment, you will learn, often in unexpected ways. Observing the consequences of your actions and getting feedback from others are the only ways to understand how well your intentions are being conveyed. Revisit your intentions and adjust as needed as you learn and grow. Goals often have to be revisited based on new findings. This is where knowing your intention can help you remember what's important. Finally, make sure you give yourself time and space to process. Your mind may be trying to lead you where you need to go. Just let it. All right, so now you have a blueprint for any type of creative collaboration. It's time to acknowledge something. We are living in the future. Today, we are living in a time where almost anything is possible. The individual has more opportunity to turn their visions into reality than at any other point in known history. There's a tendency to think about these technologies and their impact as inevitable, but starting at some vague future date. It's important to acknowledge that each of us are pioneers in a future we are building together. New mediums allow us to tell different stories, and it's up to creatives to build a vocabulary that enables these new modes of creative thinking. Today, we're here. I just hope that this is not where we're headed. So let's take a look at where we are today and where we're going to be going tomorrow. This is a vision of the next 3 to 5 years. 5G networks will give us more speed, but at shorter ranges. Virtual, augmented, and mixed reality will change how we work and experience with computers. AI and machine learning will adapt to how you work and give you more time to spend doing what matters. Cognitive interfaces will allow us to interact with computers and others with unprecedented speed and precision. And decentralized networks will change how we store and exchange data, returning more control to the individual. These are all technologies that will merge on the world stage at roughly the same time. Each is deep enough for an entire series of webinars, so I've broken each down to just a few practical points that provide a context to begin understanding how these tools might fit into your life. The next generation of wireless networks is not a complete replacement for 4G LTE we use today. 5G is simply a different method of wireless that covers shorter cell areas, using antennas to beam data directly to your device. By using a different frequency, 5G can transmit more data faster. In fact, by 2020, 1 gigabyte per second is expected to be the norm. Basically, today's wired 10 gigabit Ethernet workflows will become wireless. With that much bandwidth, cameras could transmit sensor data wirelessly to a nearby computer or even the cloud. The eventual target for 5G is 2.5 gigabytes per second, which would cover at least 80% of today's media workflows. Artificial intelligence and machine learning seem to be hyped so much right now, and yet it can be hard to figure out exactly how they might fit into your day-to-day life. For me, the answer came by fitting it into the IARC. Intention, action, reaction, and change. Computers don't have intentions. You have to provide them. Action is taken by an artist in an environment. Your environment dictates the tools you have to work with. Some of these tools will be powered by AI. What will this look like? Instead of doing everything from scratch, you'll be able to teach an AI what you want, and it will use machine learning to give you options to choose from. You will get to go through more iterations before getting feedback from others. Reaction can only be done by humans. While computers can mimic an understanding of technical quality, they can't provide the same kind of nuanced input that you or your community can provide. I mean, at the end of the day, you're making stuff for people, not computers. Finally, if you want your AI to understand how you work, you can't expect it to read your mind. You have to provide the right context so that it can provide you the right assistance when needed. You have to document lessons learned. Virtual, augmented, and mixed reality are all still in their infancy, but 2020 will be the year that they really hit the scene. We all ditch our screens and don headsets or smart glasses. So far, in order to interact with computers, we have had to think in 2 dimensions. The shift to virtual and augmented reality means a move into the 3rd and 4th dimensions. Information can be presented less abstractly, with data mapped to real and virtual coordinates. Experiences will be completely immersive, opening up entirely new ways of telling stories that we've only begun to scratch the surface of. How often and in what ways will the average person take on the bulky weight of headgear in order to gain these new superpowers? It's too soon to tell. But speaking of headgear, brain-to-computer interfaces will require you to put on some funky headpieces. So, how do these cognitive interfaces work? Can they read your mind? Well, sort of. Multiple electrodes placed at strategic points on your head allow for the computer to read the electrical pulses of your brain. You can then use those readings to trigger actions. Isolating specific thoughts is really difficult, but motor functions are pretty consistent. The signals our brain sends to control various parts of our body function pretty much the same when we think about moving as when we actually move. Research is already revealing that we can use our thoughts to control virtual limbs without special training. This has huge implications for virtual and augmented reality. Also, consistent mental images can also be used as triggers. For example, you could control an RC car with your mind by associating the image of a cube moving away from you with drive forward and the cube moving towards you with drive backward. You can do the same thing with left, right, or any other instruction. Until some consistent triggers are discovered, using these cognitive interfaces will continue to be a symbiotic learning process where we adapt our thinking to what is easier for computers to understand as much as they try to understand us. Finally, we have decentralized networks. This one is the most exciting to me, as it is also the one in most need of pioneering. As we decentralize our current digital infrastructure, we may lose the careful management provided by today's centralized service providers. While users will regain more control over their data, this will also come with more responsibility. There are 2 decentralized architectures today, block-based and agent-based. Block-based networks like blockchain are great when you need to make sure everyone has the same data. It's great for currencies, but doesn't scale very well for pretty much anything else. Agent-based networks, on the other hand, like holochain, function more like DNA. Each node has a set of terms with which it will interact with others on a transaction level. This allows for perimeterless security. Your data can be split up into pieces and encrypted in a process called sharding that makes it impossible for data to be read without the right keys. Where and how your data is stored is separated from how and where it is accessed, meaning that you have control over your data regardless of where it is. All right, that was a lot of information in a short period of time, and I hope it was valuable to you. As these technologies begin to enter our lives, it's important to reflect on how they impact you and your community. I believe these will have a much larger impact than we realize. My prediction is that the industry will continue in its trend towards a decentralized network of freelance artists. Artists will have access to unprecedented creative tools, coupled with more autonomy over their work. This will result in a highly competitive marketplace where it may be harder to distinguish yourself. Fewer artists will be able to complete more work in the same amount of time. So the future can go in one of 2 ways. Increased competition can continue to drive quality down as it becomes easier to create and release content. Or it becomes easier to filter out low-quality content, and artists, still increasing competition, drive up the value of quality. My hope is that the future will present new and unique opportunities for artists and teams to work together more intimately with the time and respect needed to focus on quality. I dream of a future where, by using these tools to simplify our day-to-day lives, we have more time to focus on what's important, instead of wasting time troubleshooting and babysitting computers. So now that you have an understanding of the creative process and you've seen a glimpse of what the future holds, I have just one question. What will you create? With that, we'll open up the floor to questions.
So we just got a question. What does new technology have to do with collaboration, and how will it help us make better motion pictures? We've discussed 5 very specific trends that are going to change the way we collaborate in the next 5 years. But what does that actually look like? Since I know that you've outfitted post houses and you've had a lot of experience with several different large clients figuring out how they're going to use their technology, how do you think studios that are large and also studios that are smaller are going to make motion pictures in the next 5 years? And are there other people that are also going to benefit from this new technology?
Yeah, well, that's kind of where all these technologies might come together in really interesting ways, is that, with virtual reality, you have the opportunity, once the systems become fast enough, that you could basically do most of your production remotely just in virtual reality. Mm-hmm. So you could have virtual cameras, you could really pretty much do your whole film on your own, even one person, or get help as needed, but do everything in previs and then just get all the data. You could have basically the camera, where to place it, distance to the actors, all the different conditions needed for shooting could basically just be already ready for you on a list, and you just go and do it. Mm-hmm. And you've already pretty much figured it out ahead of time. So that allows you to basically iterate and get things right before you even spend $1 on actually going out and shooting things in the real world. Mm-hmm. So really it's up to people to really figure out how they want to collaborate, because the opportunity is to make things more on your own. Mm-hmm. And that's really, in general with collaboration and task management, these kinds of tools, people tend to look at, what's this new system going to be that we're going to use, some new software, but really it's still about people, interacting and owning their different individual tasks. Mm-hmm. Just putting a software system in place, honestly, many times becomes an excuse to not do the things.
Mm-hmm. So can you give me a little more details about current methods of collaboration, and maybe tell me about how they help us or hinder us in completing a chain of eye arcs?
Yeah, so that's one of the biggest reasons why an eye arc is so helpful, is because it really gives you the times you need to collaborate and the times you can work on your own. Mm-hmm. Because if you just have constant collaboration, then you never have consensus and you can't get anything done. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to break those things down so that you say, okay, now we're going to talk about these things, we'll brainstorm, and then we'll all agree, okay, this is what we're doing. Or just agree, okay, we don't know where we're going to go with this, but let's figure out one person's idea or multiple people's idea to experiment, see where those go, and then we can keep talking. So you don't have to really decide, okay, we're all making a final decision. You can just decide to experiment.
Gotcha. Now, on the topic of experimentation, one of the interesting things about a new technology is that there's a lot of hype, but then inevitably there's a period in which the technology either doesn't live up to its hype or it does. And in between that period of hype and actually using the technology, there is experimentation. How can creative professionals who have been trained on a certain set of tools, let's say, for example, Adobe After Effects for broadcast television, how can they experiment with new technologies and new ways of telling stories? How can they access the technology 5 years from now today?
Well, I think the first step is to really give yourself room to learn, because the issue is that basically you have to have these tools be instinctual in order to really turn your ideas into reality at the speed that you need to, right? I mean, when you understand how these tools work and you expect that it's going to take these number of steps and that you can just do them, without thinking about it, then it doesn't make, it's not as big an issue in getting things out. But when you don't understand how the tools work and you go and you have an idea and you don't know what avenue you're supposed to take to turn that into reality, then it becomes chaos. And so really that's the most important thing, is for people to just kind of start experimenting with these new tools and see what clicks with them, what doesn't, and eventually the pioneers basically will figure out what works and what doesn't, and then make it simple for everyone else to use.
So would I need to be, if let's say that as a, I'd say I'm trying to make a film or maybe just a short film, for example, 5 minutes, I'm going to put this on Vimeo. I'm just an individual. I've got a camera. Maybe I have a Blackmagic camera. Maybe I have one computer. Is it going to be, are these new technologies going to be available to me, or do I have to go to a studio in order to access them? Who's going to get access to these technologies first?
So I mean, we have tools like Blender, which are open source. Anybody can download it and work with it, and they've got the grease pencil that you can use. So you could just start drawing and just start drawing 3 dimensions. And it's really, I think, more about getting your concept communicated than it is about having the final product. Because you got to get that emotion behind it and actually make it compelling before you can get backing. So focusing on basically that and getting your idea in some way you can communicate is, I think, more important than figuring out any specific tool. Because once you get the backing of others, then you'll be able to find an artist who understands the tools maybe better than you do and can turn your vision into reality better than you could on your own. So really it's about, I think, figuring out how you can capture those ideas and then share them.
So it's interesting that you bring up backing, because for an individual artist, a lot of the times, at least today, from my observation, it seems like collaboration, it's definitely a challenge, but it's a challenge in a different way than it would be at a studio in which people have roles and work together. As a solo artist, finding people to collaborate with in the first place is difficult. How do you do that? And then once you do collaborate with them, how do you make sure the collaboration actually results in something that's satisfying?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and if you figure out the answer to that, let me know, because that's, I think, everybody's problem, is how do you interact with people, how do you find the people to connect with? I mean, really, I think the best way to do that is to go to the places where you can learn about these things, and you'll find other people who want to learn with you, and hopefully you're at your level, and so you can grow together. I mean, that's pretty much like with film school. You know, what I was always told was that the most important reason to go to film school is that you have the gear you need to make films, and then also you have a team of people that you're going to grow into the industry with, and you know, can be kind of your support system. And so that's definitely been true for me. So I think that, you know, whether it's film school or any other organization you can join in, having people that are kind of on your level that you can experiment with and have fun with is a really important part of the process.
So film school brings up a really interesting point, because I went to an art school for game design and interactive design, and I'm not. You'll have to tell me if you've had a similar experience with film school. My artistic discipline is defined by lots of technical challenges, because I can't even make a game character unless I use a very specific 3D software, and I have a pipeline. And, whenever a computer gets involved, it seems that it complicates things to a degree that it's hard for just one person to turn their vision into reality. And on top of that, from the moment you get into art school and the moment you get out, that's 4 to 5 years. And I feel like it's not really a coincidence that we're looking at the future 5 years from now. What can educators do, and what can people who are going into an art school today do to prepare themselves for technology that's on the horizon but isn't already in an art school?
Well, I don't think it's the problem that's just for students. I think all companies today have to deal with this. I mean, if you're trying to make a production today, let's say an animated production, right? You have to start now with the technology you have, and then 5 years from now when you release your film, you know, you're not going to be able to just update everything all along the process to release it. So even the movies we see today are still a few years behind in terms of their capabilities. So if you started today, you'd get something that's much better than what you're seeing today. So I think really it's more about just starting and getting, you know, moving forward than it is about figuring out your destination. I mean, if it's compelling, it'll work. I mean, that's basically what Pixar figured out with Toy Story. If you look at, you know, Toy Story 1 through Toy Story 3, the quality changes significantly throughout them, and yet all of them are compelling.
So going back to big studios, one thing you mentioned with larger productions especially is that technical directors pick a pipeline, lock it in, and that's what they use. To me, that seems like it would work really well for a movie, especially if it's a big budget film and you can literally pay people to make the new technology, build the future. I'm thinking movies like James Cameron's Avatar, where they had previs technology on set years before it became available to the rest of the studios. However, I'm also looking at the increasing number of productions and the push to save time, save money, and maximize talent and resources. It seems to me that the more commoditized technologies become, the more people can produce things. How will using technology that is available off the shelf today and is going to possibly become old or obsolete in 5 years, how is that going to present challenges to pipeline managers and technical directors that are different from the challenges they would face if they were building the future?
Well, the biggest thing that people who don't have experience in the industry miss out on is that process of testing that happens before productions, right? I think that maybe just there's cinematographers and different people on the production who just know what they're doing, and that they just show up one day and they just make it and it all runs perfectly. But in reality, there's lots of testing that goes on ahead of time. And typically, you go in and you test all the different cameras you might want to use, lenses, all this stuff, and you get a very specific workflow that is tested that you then use. And even then, typically the first 2 weeks are chaos still, and you adapt it as you go along. So it's not like there's any perfect process to go through. You pretty much just need to make sure that you test your workflow ahead of time and then change it as you need to.
So I know that you've had a lot of experience working with several clients on building workflows for them and testing them. What are things that, what would you, for clients who can afford an entire studio space with several green screen rooms and maybe a full-time staff, what are your recommendations to them for future-proofing their workflows? Is that even a valid thing to be thinking about now, given the pace of technological change?
Well, I think we're kind of reaching a bit of a plateau now with technology. I mean, 8K is already looked at as a little too much, and so 4K and the speeds that we're getting now are, I think, pretty much going to stay, but computers are going to keep getting faster, and so, but that speed isn't going to necessarily be beneficial, beyond, So, basically, crap, I lost my train of thought. Can you repeat the question?
So, with large studios, how would they? What are ways that they can future-proof their workflows?
So really, I think it's more important to think about the color settings on the cameras and the different data that you're getting. Basically getting as much data as possible, but also having consistent color spaces in your footage actually allows you to then get the next camera and continue things so you can reuse past footage in new projects, right? And today we're basically at the point where we've got a large enough container that we're pretty much good. So even with ACES today, you could basically just capture with whatever and put it into a single space, but make sure you save those files in a format that contains all that information. Do we have any more questions from the computer?
One more question. Can you go over IARC again?
IARC, okay. So that's intention, action, reaction, and change. So the intention is basically just what is everyone wanting to get out of this process. Rather than setting goals, you set what your intentions are, which then means what everyone's stake in the game basically is. And then when you're communicating in the future, you know how to adapt to each other to make sure you all get what you want. And then action is literally just taking any action. And then reaction is just, now you've done that, you've experimented, now you look at that, and then the change is basically what you've learned, and then you decide whether you want to keep going or stop.
So would I be able to apply an IARC, for example, to trying out a new technology? What would that look like?
Yeah, so exactly. Basically, what you would do is, let's say you wanted to make like a VR film, right? But you have no idea how to make a VR film. So your intention is to make a film about, like Leah, she wants to make a film about a succulent, right?
Yep.
Okay, so you want to make a film about a succulent. That's what you want to do. And okay, now how do I do this, right? So your first action could be just researching how you do this, right? And you go through that IARC as you learn things, and then, I figure out I need to use Blender or Unity or some, application to make this happen. You just go along the process and test it out step by step, and you document lessons learned. And maybe you learn that, oh, maybe Unity wasn't the program to use, maybe it's Unreal Engine, right? But instead of saying, oh, this is the way to do it, this is the way the pros are doing it, okay, I'm going to do it this way, and if I'm failing or it's not working right, I must be wrong, and I'm just going to keep plowing through it. No. You figure out what your intentions are and your goal, and you keep basically checking and balancing it throughout the process.
Got it. And if I was to work with a team, when would I involve them in the I arc?
Well, the biggest point that you can do that in is the reaction stage, right? I mean, that's really the point, is to figure out if what your intention, or if the intention you're trying to communicate is being communicated clearly, right? I mean, that's really at the end of the day the point. I mean, in creative work, there's kind of this tendency to focus on preference. Oh, I like this, I don't like that. Oh, maybe you could change this, and kind of give your creative input. But really, it's more important to say how it affected you personally and what you took out of it, and just give that point blank to the person to do with whatever they want to.
So it's not about foisting your will or preferences or what appeals to you on other people. It's about acknowledging that your feelings are your own, and that someone else may have an intention that somebody else may have an intention to make something, and maybe your feelings and the way you felt either matches that intention or doesn't. So it's not about an idea being right or wrong. It's about saying that this idea affected me in a certain way, but it might affect other people in a different way.
Yeah, because there's all kinds of audiences, right? And so every person could be part of a different audience. Everyone's different. So getting feedback from lots of different people gives you a better idea of how your content might be received by different types of people.
So speaking of feedback, we'd love for you to let us know how this webinar has helped you. And as a bonus, we have another upcoming webinar where we're going to be diving into collaboration techniques that we can use in DaVinci Resolve. Would you like to give a little bit more information on that?
Yeah.
Our next webinar on Tuesday, February 26th, will break down how editors, assistants, colorists, sound designers, and VFX artists can work together and communicate effectively with the new collaboration tools available in DaVinci Resolve. If you have any additional questions or have an opportunity to work together, you can email us at info@creative.space, call us at 404-900-6799, or go to creative.space or digitalglue.com. Thank you.